I looked at my brother and my sisters and thought, which one of us is next and what can we do about it? Now we know there's something you can do about it. You don't just have to lay down and accept it. And that's what led us to start Kemper Cognitive Wellness.
Welcome to the Evolving Past Alzheimer's podcast, where we are focused on bringing you information to help prevent from developing and improve from suffering with brain diseases like Alzheimer's and other dementias. I'm Dr. Nate Bergman, a physician and Chief Scientific Wellness Officer at Kemper Cognitive Wellness, and I'll be your guide on these sound waves. So whether you're a baby boomer who's worried that your brain wiring just isn't working like it once was, or you have a loved one with the disease, or you yourself have already been diagnosed and are wondering, what do I do now? You'll want to listen to this podcast. Each episode, we introduce you to the top doers and thinkers that are revisioning Alzheimer's, dementia, and just generally things in life's second half. If you have questions or comments, check us out on social media. To support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show if you find these episodes valuable. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. So here we go. Let's get better. Welcome back to the show. We have, on the first day of Women's History Month, I want to introduce you to a really special group of people. Full disclosure, this is the company where I work, Kemper Cognitive Wellness. But this episode, like I said, should be coming out first day of Women's History Month. And I'm proud to say that the top leadership in our company are all women. So with that, I want to introduce you to a few people here today. We have Betty Kemper and her daughter, Kristin Kemper, founders of Kemper Cognitive Wellness. We also have Cheryl Freed, who's a vice president of learning education at Kemper Cognitive Wellness and at Kemper Company. And Betty functions sort of as a CEO. Kristen functions mostly as a COO. And Cheryl pretty much does everything else. I don't want to speak for them. I've oversimplified this, but we're going to have a really interesting conversation about kind of the origins of where I work, Kemper Cognitive Wellness, and the family story, because it's impressive. And so I want to welcome you ladies to the show.
Thank you.
Betty, maybe we can start with you since you're the matriarch here. I think it's amazing that what you're doing now in assisted livings, Alzheimer's care, and this is your work and is sort of the family business. But can you kind of explain how you got into this and your own family story in all of this?
Sure, I would love to. First and foremost, I'm a registered nurse. My background, going all the way back to the 1960s, is caring about and caring for the elderly. And when my mother-in-law, Helen, was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and they called it probable Alzheimer's disease, and that was in about 1980, our family needed to learn as much as possible about what to expect. And then being the nurse in the family led me to explore all of our options for her as her disease progressed. And we had several shocks. Back then, we learned that the knowledge about Alzheimer's disease was just emerging, including the fact that it had only recently been named and acknowledged as a disease. And there was little to no information at that time available.
Yeah.
My second shock was during her assessment, I learned a real startling fact that both my husband's grandfathers, including Helen's father, had died in a psychiatric hospital of hardening of the arteries. And of course, a red flag went up in my mind, and I was determined to learn as much as possible about the subject of dementia. Well, our next step then in her journey was to explore with her possible settings for future care if we could no longer take care of her later in her own home. And my third shock, after thoroughly investigating and traveling around with her, there were only institutional skilled nursing settings, and none of them had knowledge of the disease or how to provide care specifically.
So what you're saying, I just wanted to clarify if I understand what you're saying, Betty. So you're saying that at the time, you're talking about the mid 80s, there were assisted living facilities, which is where people go when they can't live independently anymore. were completely mixed with people with Alzheimer's, dementia, and then people that didn't have legs or couldn't walk because of diabetes,
Or
something like,
nursing
but were cognitively fully intact and were all sort of being treated the same.
Yes, absolutely.
That's crazy.
It was just one way to care for everybody.
Well, not just assisted living facilities, though, but nursing homes. Everybody was just mixed together and cared for in the same manner.
Exactly.
So you can see there, that's Kristin Kemper. So this is Betty's daughter.
Yes.
She's heavily involved for the last 25 plus years in the family company. So we'll get Kristen here in a second, but I just wanted to follow Betty's path a little bit further. Thank you for the interjection, Kristen.
Well, and I knew then that I had to do something about that situation. And so I was working for a regional not-for-profit at the time, which housed elderly women, basically. And I wrote one of the very first programs in the country for care where I was able to demonstrate and show by separating out dementia care was very different from skilled nursing care. And it was the beginning of a national movement then to distinguish the different models of care for aging persons and their individual needs, and especially for those that were being diagnosed with dementia at that time. It also then led me to the next iteration, and that was creating a housing and care setting that accommodated all of those principles of the program. And we created an environment and a way of living and dying well for these people, and we created and developed Kemper House.
And Kemper House now is the assisted living. You have a couple locations at this point.
Yes.
That the company operates. So then there's almost like more to the story, but I want to invite Kristen into this point to kind of introduce herself. And so now we have the assisted living, sort of a special model for Alzheimer's and other dementias care, where people can move into when they can no longer take care of themselves, or their family members or people that love them can no longer take care of themselves. And Kristen, can you kind of explain your role in Kemper House and how it led to the development of Kemper Cognitive Wellness?
Sure. Well, I headed up all the operations for Kemper House from the time the first door opened in 1999. And before that, we had worked on refining the program. And it was really based on, to us, common sense. It was caring really about the individual and getting to know that individual as the person they were, but also as the person they are now with the disease, living with the disease. And that led us to, many changes. We're always, looking for how to improve ourselves. But a big change came several years ago when we started to notice some changes in my dad. And, we thought, here we go with us. Throughout the last several years of, noticing some changes and trying to figure out what to do. And then, when the actual diagnosis came, even though it wasn't a shock to us, it was a whole new reality all over again. And people would say, "Oh, you're so lucky you're in the business. You'll know exactly what to do." But the truth is that doesn't really help. It really just makes it harder because you have to come at it from every single side. Like your staff now is caring for your father, and your families are disagreeing on what the best course of action is. And, so it just created a whole other layer of issues for us.
So what did you learn? I mean, clearly you've learned from that, because, when I spoke with you initially, we met about 3 years ago, it was, you guys were sort of thinking about things differently, and had just this sort of nightmare experience with your father and Betty, your husband, on all these medications. And I mean, can you kind of take us through what that was like?
Yeah. Yes. So about that time, about 2015, we were starting to think, well, we've got to get our, my parents have 5 children, me being the second oldest, even though mentally I'm the oldest. No. But so I thought, oh my gosh, there's got to be something we can do as a family. We can figure out as much information as we can, and we can investigate. And so we started to look into alternatives, and I discovered, the whole plant-based world and healthy living, which I know it sounds funny to say, but it was newer to us. And so we started on a journey of better health. And we thought, you know what? We control everything our residents do during their day. We control what they put in their mouths. We control when they eat, how they move. I wonder if we can do something at Kemper House to help make our residents' lives better, just like we're trying to do with my dad. And even though they had really good lives overall, they were on the typical comfort diet. If they wanted sweets, they got sweets. If they wanted to sleep, they slept. If they wanted to get up and walk around, they got up and walked around. But was that really what was the most helpful for them? And so we started down that path. And in 2017, Dale Bredesen's book, The End of Alzheimer's, came out, and it was just an epiphany, like a light bulb went up of, oh my God, there is something you can do about it to even not only improve, but maybe even reverse the disease. And I looked at my brother and my sisters and thought, which one of us is next, and what can we do about it? Now we know there's something you can do about it. You don't just have to lay down and accept it. And that's what led us to start Kemper Cognitive Wellness.
And you can describe, Kemper Cognitive Wellness. We sort of are developing a reputation as one of the leading companies in the world, really, around the total care for Alzheimer's and other dementias, right? So from a prevention to intervention, early intervention, all the way through the later stages of dementia. We can treat someone with brain fog and ADHD, anxiety, all the way through, hey, people need hospice and they're ready to pass away from Alzheimer's and other dementia. So it's interesting so Kemper Cognitive Wellness is at this point about 3.5 years old.
Yeah, it's
and the initial aim was, hey, let's do something different. Let's do something earlier.
Yes. We at Kemper House, and most people don't move into an Alzheimer's care facility until they are, I'll say mid-stage, Nate, you would say later stage, when they can no longer drive and, sometimes even walk, and they're trying to manage at home as long as they can with family or help. And we thought, well, we can help people who notice issues sooner. We can help see what is going on in their body and in their minds and in their environment. And so we started down that path, not really working with doctors, but working with, I became a recode practitioner and started just doing lab tests that we could order on our own and trying to see if we recognized anything. And we did. And that's actually when we met you through the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah, I remember that day well. And so I want to bring Cheryl into this conversation now. So we had this, there was a company it's been running dementia care facilities. So assisted living facilities that are specific for Alzheimer's and dementia for a couple decades. And then they say, hey, this has impacted our family so much. We ourselves are at risk. Betty's husband, Kristen's father, gets the illness, gets Alzheimer's disease, and has, they have their own whole set of experiences, which we could talk about probably a different time. But learning now about the work of prevention or early intervention, work of Dale Bredesen and others, and getting involved in it, starting Kemper Cognitive Wellness, which I will say, Cheryl, as a vice president, really in the company, and you've been there, Cheryl Freed, you've been there 16 years?
Yeah, I'm working in my 15th year right now.
15th year as a social worker, and now like a vice president and executive there. So what are your thinking? So you're sort of entrenched in the traditional model, even though when it started in 1999, it was still kind of ahead of the curve. But you're working in more of a traditional assisted living facility, and then Kristen and Betty say we're going to start Kemper Cognitive Wellness. We're going to start to work upstream. What were you thinking as someone who really is largely responsible for creating the culture in the organization?
Yeah, I'm giggling to myself because this is how these two ladies work. They're cutting edge, and it usually a month or two wouldn't go by that one of them wasn't running in and said, "Guess what? We're going to start." So I've just kind of grown up in this culture of we're going to do something new. It was really hard for us at first when Kristen was ahead of the curve and learning all about the Bredesen stuff. And We went really fast and furious at our houses when she learned this stuff, and we learned a lot from that. But really, when it all settled down and simmered down, I am the biggest fan now of some of the changes that we're making. Yes, we are all about having people live well till their end. But what we've done is learned a couple things like this. Just because somebody has dementia and is living with us or has it at all, that doesn't mean we give up on them. It doesn't mean that they can have everything that they want to eat, because why would we allow people to gain weight, lose their mobility? Just it would not make a good quality of life. And so we are just adding so many things into our houses and into the lives of the folks we're working with Kemper Cognitive Wellness, so they can learn how sleep impacts them and how stress can impact them. And then putting better fuel in their body and just moving will make anyone feel better, and especially folks that have any kind of cognitive loss. So we have just been learning every day together, learning different ways to help people, whether it's in our houses, whether it's with cognitive wellness, helping families just learning how to deal with it. Just because a family member in your family has a diagnosis doesn't mean everybody knows what to do. So I feel so blessed and honored to be part of this whole process of helping everybody live better lives, whether you're the person with the cognitive loss or the family member who is assisting the person to live their best life.
Yeah. So that's so interesting, living your best life. So can you say a little bit more about, certainly we have a lot of listeners that are kind of in the throes of getting a diagnosis. Maybe, some are concerned about getting themselves, but a lot of our people are already people that are wondering what they can do because they already have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. Maybe you guys can talk about, okay, well, what can you do by the time someone's already diagnosed? What can be done?
There is so much you can do, and it really depends on obviously where you're at, where you're living in the country. But now, honestly, with COVID, you can do so much, telehealth, you can do so much research on your own. But in the end, we needed that doctor piece to guide us down the scientific path, because we already had some of the other practically speaking, the paths of, like, obviously we try to cut out sugar or limit refined carbs and processed foods. And obviously we try to get better sleep. And obviously we try to exercise or move a little bit. But what else? What else deeper? What else was going on underneath?
So, Kristen, I want to stop you there because I think we kind of glossed over that. When you started learning, and so Cheryl was just talking about, she recalls when you first started learning about some of the newer practices being espoused by Dale Bredesen and others. And what did you try over at the Kemper House? What did you do?
We found a chef who was very interested in what we were doing and wanted to work with us. And we started first with the food changes. And we didn't realize at the time, but we, over a period of about a week, cut out most of our sugars and our refined carbs and our processed foods, and much of our dairy and gluten, a lot of inflammatories. We were trying to reduce inflammation. And we lived through 2 weeks of hell, we call it, just because people were, staff were up in arms of what's going on, what are you doing, this is odd. And residents were, agitated and having behaviors. But you know what, we saw, they were detoxing. We saw our use of PRN, or as needed pain medication, plummet. We really don't use laxatives per se, but you have people that are on them, and we saw that go down as well. And then over the last couple of years, we have seen people get up and walk, remember things. Like, remember, a staff member was out last week, and we've gotten so many people off of insulin that we thought, we're onto something here. We're onto something. People are more alert. People are paying attention. Let's keep going on these paths and see what else we can do for people.
So I'm fascinated by that. That was one of the things that really drew me to Kemper was that story right there. I was just, wow. And I remember coming over to Kemper House for the first time. Kemper Houses are located in a couple different locations around the greater Cleveland area, one on the west side, one on the east side. There have been more in the past, but I think the choice has been sort of consolidate. And keep just these two for now. And I remember seeing, first of all, I remember that it really felt like a house, like it felt like someone's home. I've worked in a lot of these kinds of places. Some look really, really good, but when you see the care that's delivered, you look at the kind of training that comes from the top that the caregivers at the bedside are getting. It's pretty unimpressive. And I just remember feeling that it's like a home. And I remember asking, particularly the hospice nurses there, who the hospice nurses, will be deployed to a place like Kemper House, and they'll work at a lot of different facilities. I remember asking them for a more sort of objective perspective of what that might look like. What the care at the Kemper House might look like compared to other places. And they were across the board to a person were saying, the quality of care here is just better. It's just different, even though it doesn't look so fancy. It looks like a home. But the care is different. The heart of the caregivers is noticeably different. And so I was so impressed by that. So I think Cheryl, I'd like to bring you also back in here to sort of comment on what does a success look like as someone moves through later stages of dementia. How do we sort of define success or living well?
That's a really good question. I think it's so individualized, and what it's all about is maintaining skills as much as possible and using what they're still able to do and adjusting and adapting and pivoting, whether you're the caregivers in a facility or whether you're a family member taking care of your loved one at home. It's taking a look at them and seeing what they still can do and allowing them to do it. So often we want to treat folks with either disabilities or, dementia as, oh, well, they have that, they no longer can do anything. And that is the worst thing that we can do, is take away everything from a person. So we just spend a lot of our time adapting activity and things that are happening in the homes to make sure that they can still be a part of it. And everybody wants to have meaning and purpose in their life. And that doesn't mean just sitting around doing nothing. It means getting involved and being able to do things. So that's what we're all about, is how do we have people still participating? So for an example, we have a lot of women at the era that have been office managers and taking care of the clerical things in really important business companies. So why take that all away from them? So we have office clubs where they do shredding and they can pass mail out. And we don't do as many mailers, but they would fold the mailers and do things like that. Or the men who liked and had an interest in being in fixing things and doing things. I remember one of my favorite stories is we had a person that used to be like in charge of all of the maintenance department at his building. And so one of the maintenance men would take him around once a week with a clipboard, and his job was to point out where the light bulbs needed to be changed. And he had a really important job. And it was a real job. And so those are a couple of examples of what living well with dementia can look like.
There's also consideration for the end of life, and I know people don't like to talk about that, but what we have found also is we can help residents have a much better ending to their life than they would have had otherwise.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Betty, you and I have talked about that and connected on that on a few different occasions. And we're most everybody that's on this call, and certainly most of the people that are listening to this show would be technically in the second half of their life. So whether that starts at 35 or 45 or whatever, 50 or whatever time that starts, I think it just means we're more aware of the time that we have and the time that we spend. So Betty, as someone who's gone through this with multiple family members, now going through this with your life's partner, right? And I know John, and he's, if I'm able to say, he's at he's fairly advanced in his Alzheimer's process, even by the when I first met him. Can you kind of describe, like, I don't know, just what goes through the mind and heart of a spouse? So this is your partner for your whole life. You built a family together. You've been very successful on a lot of levels together. Beautiful family, beautiful businesses, doing well. And now sort of this chapter in your life, or this period in your life is got to be a challenge, right? It's got to be a challenge. And I just wonder how you sort of adjust, adapt, and then kind of define success in terms of marriage and in terms of this part of life.
Sure. First of all, let me tell you, even being a registered nurse and being in the business of caring for older people, all of my career, basically, there is nothing harder than when it happens to you. That I can honestly tell everybody that it is a very difficult time. But there are things that that at least we are doing, Kristen and Cheryl and their whole team, that I think can help you and make it palatable, if I can say it that way. My husband is in his very end stages. He's unable to do anything for himself. He can't talk, walk, stand. But what has been so important and what has helped through all of the things that they've been doing through diet and technology, all sorts of different treatments through Kemper Cognitive Wellness. He is alert, and that is so important. And he's content, very content. So when I walk into his room, he does look at me. He doesn't speak, can't do anything, smiled, respond. But I can see in his eyes that there is some recognition of something. And the fact that he is alert and not glazed over is just my reward, actually. It really makes me feel really good. And one of the things that I've noticed since we started the whole program uh, is that often in the former settings, people would take a long time to die, actually. Uh, Early on, we had families that would come in and someone would be in their very final stage, and it could take up to several weeks. And what we have experienced now is that the person will be pretty, very alert, um, very still. I want to say, with it in their own ways. Engaged is the good word, and then they die. And I cannot think of a better way. It's almost a reward because it's a good ending is what I call it, and I can't think of a better way to go than having a very brief but good ending.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
I'd like to note that, my dad got that way before we knew what to do, and I always wish we would have known earlier how to stop some of this or fight it off, because I think we could have really helped him be better longer. And so that's kind of how we've now have grown Kemper Cognitive Wellness into helping people not just stave it off or reverse the disease, but really help them at a different level, at the level of where we are now, like coming into the facility or making that transition when you've already gotten a diagnosis or should get a diagnosis. Because I got to tell you, we and Betty will corroborate our story, but we were there. We were that family that was, disagreed on what route to take or what was best for dad or what's not. And, we definitely made mistakes, but we didn't know what to do, even though we were, quote, in the business, unquote, ourselves, And so it came a point where he was having behaviors, and we argued amongst ourselves which would be the best path, and we argued which medications and we didn't know. But now we know. We have so much knowledge between all of us here on this podcast, but also all of us in our organization. We have so much knowledge to help you just navigate before or after the diagnosis. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to know. I don't want to know if I'm going to get it. But now I could see that philosophy when we didn't know what to do about it. But now that we know what to do about it, why? Why wouldn't you want to know and at least do something to help yourself? Do something.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to put ourselves in a position with other people, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's why part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm doing this with you guys. So the other point that you made, Kristen, I think is really interesting, is that, so there's this wealth of knowledge, decades and decades of sort of collective experience, thousands of residents and clients and patients over the years. And, obviously not everybody lives in Cleveland to get to a Kemper House, but people still are contracting this illness. They're getting Alzheimer's, they're getting other dementias. And like you mentioned with your father, sometimes it was too late to intervene with some of the prevention measures. And some people just aren't going to do all of the things. They're not going to adopt a plant-based diet. I remember being in an office with a billionaire, literally a billionaire, and he just wasn't interested in exercising and treating sleep apnea, in eating differently and cutting down drinking a little bit. It just wasn't really an interest. So it's not for everybody. But I do still think, like you mentioned, there's a lot that can be done, even for people that don't have access to a Kemper House or a Kemper Cognitive Wellness. I think, and I want to introduce this course that we just created. It's an online course. It's called Live Well with Dementia. It's called Live Well with Dementia, and it really leverages all the things that you were just talking about, Kristen. It's the experts, sort of the scientific expertise. It's what we piece together from all of the what's going on in the brain, what's going on in the mind, and the ability to communicate in somebody with Alzheimer's and other dementia. And then it's really a huge amount. It's hours and hours of practical tools on how to care for someone who already has this disease or disease like it, any kind of dementia, and how to live their best life with the diagnosis. I'm really proud of the work that we've done together. Cheryl, you are a role player there. Can you kind of describe the Live Well with Dementia course from your perspective?
It is first and foremost, I was just so impressed with all the people that we were able to have on the course. So it's a combination of, you'll see us talking on video, but it also has a lot of written support and different things that you can use, call resources, things like that. I think what I like about it also is that every person that is on the course, giving information, has had a personal connection to it, whether it be themselves or their family members. And so it just kind of, we understand where people are at. And I hope that everybody gets a feeling that we understand where they're at and we're just trying to help them, not only as the caregivers, but also the person that has the cognitive loss. It's broken down in some really usable formats of different topics, so you can pop in and out to what you want to hear. Maybe at a certain day you're like, oh my gosh, we didn't get any sleep, I got to really go on that sleep section. So I just like the way it was formatted. I think it's very user friendly, and most importantly, I think that people will feel, wow, somebody gets where I'm at, and I needed this right now. And that's what my biggest hope is for who is going to be using the e-course.
And we created it based on questions that we would get from people over and over and over again, or things that we would see when people moved in and they didn't have funeral arrangements, or even a durable power of attorney for healthcare, or a do not resuscitate order, and they'd be like, well, I don't know, what is that? Why I don't. And so we put even those components in it, because there's so much. It's overwhelming when you get a diagnosis, either yourself or your loved one, or you're caring for someone. You almost don't. It's all you can do to get through a day. And so we tried to wrap a lot of stuff into this so that everybody can live well with dementia.
Yeah, really to help caregivers, really, just because the caregivers are, as we all know, are often feeling completely overwhelmed. So that's where can we find out more about the course, Kristen?
It's livewellwithdementia.com.
Okay, very good. So livewellwithdementia.com.
You can also go to Kemper House or kemperwellness.com.
Okay. Is there anything we didn't cover that you guys wanted to cover?
Just that you do not have to, you are not alone in this, and you do not have to suffer alone. And that's such a big change of a mindset for people with dementia. For a long time, it was sort of the, everyone always says, well, they fought hard again with cancer, they fought, but they died of dementia, and it's not true. You can fight hard with dementia and you can live better with dementia. And I think people need to know that.
It's beautiful. It's the reason I'm here. So I thank you guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the ability to be connected to this organization. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
So that's our episode. I hope it was useful to you. Check out the show notes on iTunes or on our website where we've summarized the key points. If you find the information here valuable, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and leaving comments in the comments section. It will really help us bring this message to as many people as we can. If you have questions or comments, connect with us on social media. Finally, to support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. Thanks. I'll talk to you next time.